Well, hello. Good morning. I think we've begun. I think it's time. I'm coming to you this morning. Good morning, Betsy. Good morning, Lisa. Good morning, all else joining us today. I'm coming to you live from Casa de Val, a very exciting remote entry into Ask a Priest. Um, Not any really secret reasons for it. We are upgrading our internet at church, but upgrading our internet means that we're in the middle of not having our internet work for a little bit, right? Because they got to get it all wired up and set up. So rather than take the chance that we would have our time interrupted, we decided to do it with my from home, and hopefully with all the kids at school. I'm the only one on the internet in theory. In fact, let me turn my Wi-Fi off, and we should be good to go to be with each other here on Ask a Priest this morning. What an interesting time to be us, is it not? What an interesting time to be alive. I am genuinely overjoyed by the reality that I know that I have a community that I can share my stress with, and that I know that I'm not alone in my hopes and my fears, my frustrations and my anticipation. There is so much. Not just, I mean, comfort is the right word, but I don't think comfort's the only word, or I almost feel like it doesn't go deep enough. So much comfort for me in knowing that we look forward to being with each other and checking in with each other and seeing how each other's doing. Right. So I like that. Obviously, this is the post-election day Ask a Priest. So we're going to talk about the election. I saw a meme that said, if you're a Calvinist, every day is election day, which I thought was quite funny, very church nerdy. Probably not the audience. You'd think this would be the audience for that, but probably not. Anyways, here's the interesting thing to me, or one of the interesting things. We were told repeatedly by people who were paying attention that this was very, very likely. Exactly. I'm sorry, Rachel. Calvinists tend to believe that that certain people have been elect, which is to say chosen from before time to be those who would become Christian and do the work of God. Essentially, it's the idea of the elect are the ones that God has chosen, which is a nice feeling unless you're not one of them. And that has oftentimes led into theologies of people who are chosen to go to heaven. And, you can guess what the alternative to that is: chosen to go to hell. So there's some interesting dynamics there. That's an gross oversimplification of a very complex and thoughtful theology to which I don't ascribe. But I made a joke that was not very good. All right. People who were listening to election conversations that were informed were very, very adamant that that yesterday was very likely not going to give us a final answer, so to speak, a definitive result. And yet, living in this in between time of not having an official result is incredibly painful, isn't it? For me, it's painful for a number of reasons. One, uncertainty sucks, right? If someone hears some definitive decision about something during this session, definitely type it in the chat line so I know about it, because I'll try not to look at my phone during this conversation, except to look at the questions that you all have sent me. That uncertainty is tough. There's a deeper toughness, I think, for us. And it's this, that I'm outside and I'm in my house, so there's going to be dogs barking from time to time. It's okay. My dog barks a lot. No clear results means that it's close. And the fact that it's close means there's no real mandate. And the fact that there's no mandate means that it's very, very clear that we are just an incredibly divided country right now. And I think that there were some folks And I don't know that it was all of one party, I don't think, or ideology. I could be wrong, but I think there were some folks who really were hoping that we were going to see something definitive yesterday, not only so they could sleep at night or so their team could win or whatever, but also so that there could be some sense of a united corporate spirit, like an understanding of what we are and what we're becoming, and people being at least somewhat on the same page. I remember when the pandemic first sort of became a pandemic, when back in March, when we were all in this space of unknowing and just really not, there was so much that we didn't understand, as opposed to now when we all get it so clearly. There was this hope from some of us that this would be a uniting thing, even if it was a bad thing, that we'd all be united in against the bad, I was watching this movie yesterday called Battleship, because I needed to watch something that was not going to be about the election. And it's a movie about an alien invasion, of course, duh. And my friend was like, yeah, that's exactly what we need right now in 2020, an alien invasion, right? He said, well, actually, like in the movie Independence Day or something else, like an alien invasion might be what it would take to actually unite us all. And I said, I don't buy it, because even then, half the people would be like, well, there's no alien invasion. And the other half would be like, well, you're idiots for not believing in the alien invasion. And then we'd kill each other, or the aliens would just watch us kind of destroy each other over whether or not they were even there, and I feel that way a little bit about the pandemic. We were hoping that it would be a uniting reality, and it mostly hasn't been. It's been very divisive in our country. And so I think there was this sense that among some people, or some hope anyway, that yesterday would be clear and definitive, because it would make a statement about who America is. I think this is who America is, at least during our time. I think that we're very divided in our understanding of what's happening in the world, what's happening in our country, and what our part to play in it is. We're not on the same page about racism at all. We're not on the same page about what good leadership looks like. We're not on the same page about anything like how we understand and interact with science, scientific process and data. And we're not on the same page about how we even receive our information, our news, our communications. We're not on the same page. There's so much that we're not on the same page about. That is right now, to me, the lesson, the story for now. And I like, Lisa, I like your silver lining, that you just said over here. We are all together in limbo instead of our tribal group, and that's a good thing. I kind of feel that way too. I really, really want to understand as fully as possible what an appropriate way to be Christian in the midst of this is. How to live into the Christianity for which I was designated. There are certain vows that we take. There's a covenant into which we enter as Christians. And I want to best understand how to live that out. I will say that if the country was more or less all on the same page, that might actually create an opportunity for Christians to get complacent. If you were more of a conservative Christian and we saw a mandate around Trump, you might feel like the job was done and you could just allow for that to keep perpetuating itself and do that. If you were more of a what might be called a progressive Christian, and Biden won and the Senate was flipped and there was this obvious shift of power, you might be tempted to be triumphal in that and to say, see, we did it, and also to go, well, now they've got it. Regardless of who's president next, Christians have a responsibility to bear witness to the love of God that is in Jesus Christ, present and active in this world. Right? Doesn't matter if it's a Republican or Democrat in office if there are children in cages. It doesn't matter if there's a president, Republican or Democrat in office if we continue to perpetuate white supremacy in our justice system and in our economics. It doesn't matter if there's a Republican or Democrat in office if they're drone striking civilians in sovereign nations, right? The reality is that we have a responsibility to our country as Christians. We have a responsibility to whatever community of which we're a part to bear witness to the love that is the defining reality of all life. And so to the degree that there is good news in this lack of mandate, for me, I think some of that good news is, for Christians, our work becomes more clear. And the truth of our inability to be complacent becomes more plain, right? Rachel says, isn't the limbo very fear-based for all of us, though? Fear of different things. The idea of that makes me so sad. There's a lot of sadness to be had. There's a lot of sadness to be had. Again, regardless of who wins, there's a lot of sadness to be had. And I don't mean to say like both sides. I mean, just as humans, again, our inability to be sad even about the same things is tough. But if we can share each other's grief a little bit, even across those differences, and I mean even just a little bit, and recognize and have empathy for people who are feeling that uncertainty, even when we are uncertain about different things. If we can get down to that base emotion, that's a starting ground for some relationships and reparations, some reparative work among us. And Lisa says, I have felt so exhausted that today actually feels like a day of rest. Is being a Christian always to be so exhausting, always a fight? Specifically, Lisa, no, because being a Christian should, and I'm saying this without any kind of exaggeration, sarcasm, or flippancy, casualness to your remark, we should be resting once a week. It's a commandment from God that we take a Sabbath. It is actually a command of God that we rest. We're going to be focusing at the church on rest throughout Advent, not as a way of saying we've earned it, let's take it easy, ever, but as an acknowledgement that humans were built to rest. And that's really important right now. In terms of the Christian witness, this is the important thing of us being a body. I mean, I've used this analogy before, and I certainly didn't come up with it. Someone else did, right? But it's worth, like, I think about it a lot, which is when you see a choir or a symphony orchestra playing, a choir is the best example in the sense of, like, when the sound's ongoing and a note is being held for a long time, different singers drop out to catch their breath and others keep singing to keep it going. That's how the music is made. And this is true in symphony orchestras and in bands and other things as well. That unless you're a solo act, you can depend on your bandmates, on your choir mates, on the ones that are making music with you. Christianity cannot be practiced alone. It is meant to be practiced in community. And so the work of and real community, not abstract community, by the way, not just like I have a feeling about certain people, but like we're meant to share our lives in practical ways with one another. And we should be structuring our communities in such a way that you can take a day off knowing that that day I'm going to be kicking ass for Jesus. And then I can take a day off because I know on that day someone else is going to be kicking ass for Jesus. That's actually one of the really important parts of the Christian community, is that we are, as humans, built. Indwelling in us is the need for rest. It's an essential part of life. It's not a bad thing. It's not an, oh, well, I guess we have to. It's not weakness at all. It's natural. And I feel like many of us have been operating with clenched fists, not only over the last 4 years, but for many years. And that our desire to see a more just, more equitable, more loving and wholehearted world has sometimes been, we've sometimes been idolaters of that, like held that up as the most important thing to at the expense even of our own physical, mental, spiritual, emotional health and well-being. There's a lot of language right now going around in pop culture around and in the well-being circles and mental health circles around grind culture, right? Which is exactly what it sounds like the culture where everything's a grind and you got to grind it out and you got to do more, push more, make it work. And rest is for the weak and it's embarrassing. And you get sick. And when you get sick, you work. And because you're needed. And even if you're not needed, you're worried that you won't be needed and all of that. That's unhealthy. And grind culture is very real in the injustice work. People who are convicted that God is bringing justice into the world and is inviting us as Christians to participate, or not Christians, even people who aren't Christians, inviting people to participate in the work of justice, oftentimes feel like if they ever put that down for a minute, they've done something wrong. But we need to create and live into systems where rest is normalized and not just acceptable, but recognized as an essential part of our lives. There's also some concern around rest that somehow for those of us like myself, those of us who have privilege, immense privilege. Good morning, Beth Weinwith. I am so glad that you are here with us. There is this. There is also a sense among those of us who experience an immense amount of privilege in this world, that if we were to rest, somehow we can rest and people on the margins can't rest. Again, everyone needs to rest. And part of it's not just about doing justice, it's about living justly. And so it's not like I will only rest once you get a chance to rest. It's what can I do to help others to rest as well when I am working? So what does it look like to lift the burden a little bit for others who are less privileged, who are a little bit more on the margins than you? But the idea that others are tired, therefore we should never rest, is actually really, really dangerous. We want to cultivate like real and genuine healthy practices that help us to see God's presence in the world, to see God's presence in those around us. And the reality is, like, when you're not taking care of yourself, and that's not, again, I don't want to idolize self-care. Like, sometimes we got to push. Sometimes we got to get tired. Sometimes we got to beat ourselves up. Sometimes we got to get exhausted. I get that. I do. But when we make that our whole being, when we make that our whole reality, when we structure our lives and our culture around our own non-stoppedness, I just made that term up, but it works. We can't pretend that somehow health will come out of that. Health and well-being will come out of that. And like when you're tired, that you're kind of crappy towards other people. And when they're tired, they're crappy towards you. Like, you know that. Anyone who's been around anyone for more than 5 minutes knows that. But then again, we treat our need for rest, we treat it as weakness. That makes me sad. And I think that that's something that we can work on. So I think it makes sense for you, Lisa, and for others of you to feel like now is a time for rest. Even we've done a lot of hard work and you voted. That matters. And it makes sense for us to sit and pause and be nervous together and grieve a little bit together. And again, Rachel, even if we're grieving for different reasons, and to take a breath and say, we're gonna have a lot of work to do. So today I eat, or have a drink, or I sit down, or I relax, or and then we need to build practices that sustain us so that we can be consistent in our work. If you don't rest until there's justice, you're never going to rest, because there's always going to be something for us to be working on in this place, right? In this country, in this world, in this life, right? Lisa, I'm sorry that there are people in your family who are in gloat mode. One, I'm not sure that there's much to gloat about, but that's their business. We feel really connected. We really want to be good family members, don't we? To people that we love. And sometimes they mistreat us. Sometimes it's just being inconsiderate. Other times it's actually abusive. But there are times, this is where you having strong boundaries for yourself is really important. And it's completely makes sense if you need to distance yourself from people who are going to take glee, act gleefully or glibly in a space where you are anxious or upset. It makes sense for you to distance yourself from that, at least for now, so you can, regather and recover. It's important, So I had two different people message me this morning, specifically with the question about where we see God in this election. And I've already spoken a little bit to that, but I want to speak a little bit more to it. And then, Rachel, I want to jump, but I think I should probably respond directly to what you just said. Rachel says, that's also my difficulty. I feel so far apart from many other Christians. I don't want Christianity to be othering, and yet. I agree. So here's the thing. How do I say this? This is a real tightrope I'm going to try to walk right here. Okay? And it may be wrong. I may get it wrong, but I think this is the thing. Christians are very often like, especially like I'm an American Christian or a Christian American, you pick. I'm a Christian who is American, and you are too, I think most of you, all of you who are on right now. That like we have this idea that being Christian means it should mean the same thing for everybody. And there should be some common ground, obviously. There is some, but it is frustrating for us how wildly divergent it can be to call yourself Christian. But there's a lot of tribalism in there. And there's a lot of room for judging others. A lot. And there's a really strong desire to kind of go, well, mine are the best. We're the best. Because you're protecting yourself, right? Like it's a protective thing, right? And I think what I want to say is kind of what I was saying to Lisa a little bit, but like a little bit deeper, like, or a little bit more explicit, like, how can you practice Christianity, your understanding of Christianity within your community, both your community of faith, and then how does that allow you to live more deeply into your call outside of this world? And if other people are Christian and they're doing it differently, you take that to God. I mean that genuinely, not abstractly. You take that to God and you go, I don't know what to do with this. And pray about that. Like literally pray, God, I don't know what to do with this. I'm on a different page than other people here, right? Like, I don't know. And and I think that that's something for us to, like, you're not going to be able to be on the same page as all Christians, not in this lifetime. And the kind of, I think it was actually an idealistic dream that there was ever this time when Christians were all on the same page. I don't know when that was. I mean, all of the New Testament scriptures are written to Christian communities who are arguing with each other about trying to be Christian and what's the best way to do it. That's either incredibly heartening or incredibly discouraging, maybe a little bit of both, depending on how you look at it. So, you know, if whatever work we need to do, Rachel, to withhold judgment from others. When I say withhold judgment, I don't mean withholding our ability to recognize right from wrong. I just mean we don't always know why people believe what they believe or where they're at. And we have the capacity to do some deep listening. You know, Carolyn Martin jumps in here and says, God is in the middle. Neither team has a mandate. We need to take off our jerseys, listen to one another, and find common ground in the middle. And I think there's something about that listening that's really important. I do want to say, Carolyn, that God is in the midst of us, I believe. When we say God is in the middle, I have mixed feelings. If it creates an opportunity for us to really listen to each other's concerns, then I'm on board with that. I also know that we have a capacity to create an arbitrary middle and call it the middle ground when it's not necessarily. That there are things that on which we cannot compromise. I mean, an obvious example would be if, during the struggle over the abolition of slavery. So there's pro-slavery and anti-slavery. Is the middle ground some slavery? And is that where God is? And I know that's not what you're suggesting. And that's an extreme example. It is an extreme example. But I use it as an illustration because I want us to acknowledge that there are some things that we aren't not able to let up on. And at the same time, I absolutely agree with you that we need to be listening to each other. And that what team we're on can't always be the first thing we think about, right? That if we are going to think about what team we're on, recognizing we're all in the same human family, that's a real thing. And that we're all interconnected, that we're all interwoven, that we are all part of the same fabric that God has made. And so the dehumanizing of people who think differently has got to go. And the immediate sort of shunning or kind of disconnection from people who are on the other side of us, or who the immediate jumping to conclusions that we know what they think and what they're about, that's got to go. We do have to create a space where we are able to stand for our convictions. And that's some tricky territory there, But yes, we have to come together and stop screaming at one another from the extremes. Can't scream while you listen, right? And can't listen while you're screaming. And I agree with you. I mean, what I would said at the very beginning, I'm not sure if you were on yet, but what I'd said at the very, very beginning was essentially that there is, as you said, there is no mandate, and where I see God in this is that God's the one holding up the mirror to us. God is the one holding up the mirror to us, saying, "This is what you are. This is what you are. Don't say this isn't what you are. This is what you are." We can no longer say well, we're not, this isn't who we really are. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. We're divided. We are partisan tribalists. We are very much on different pages about what a right even is and who gets them. We are very much on different pages on what equality looks like and how to secure it. We're just on different pages about those things. We're very much not exceptional. American exceptionalism is a crock. You don't have to think your country is the best country ever that ever existed in the whole universe to love it. You can love this country very much and not think of it as this once in a lifetime reality that's a beacon of the world, blah, 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 blah. You can see us as fallible and needing to work and needing to grow and needing to change. You can see that and still love your country. I think that's an important note for us. And yeah, Lisa mentions that there are a huge percentage of people that are okay with racism. I know that publicly people would say, no, that's not true. But I 100% agree with you. I think it's very clear that people are okay with racism. White people are very okay. And other people, actually some people of color are as well, but the white people are the predominant force of that. I mean, by far, right? I mean, white supremacy is very much real and alive in this country. And that crosses political divides, and that crosses ideology as well in many cases. Very many, more than we'd like to admit. Okay. White supremacy is not in any way, shape, or form, and the propping up of systemic racism is not in any way, shape, or form the exclusive domain of one political party in this country, and never has been. Ever. So we've got a lot of work to do there, and there's a lot of people who don't even still recognize that there's work to be done. I want to read what Beth said because I think it's really wonderful. Beth Weinwith says, I worked as an election official in the polling location that went 70-30 for Trump yesterday, right down the street from where I live. From my limited interaction with them, the Trump voters were in fact human beings. It was very interesting to be immersed in what was other. Beth is, I think I can say based on what you're saying, I can say publicly that you are a pretty staunch and open Democrat. Don't think I'm breaking any rules of confidentiality there about you. So that's what you're describing as other, I think. I just want to make it clear for not everyone knows exactly all those things. That's all. It was very interesting to be immersed in what was other in such a controlled and orderly setting when no one was screaming at each other. Yeah, I mean, so social media, look, we're on social media right now, so I'm not condemning social media. Social media creates opportunities for people to connect. Those connections are not in person. They are still real connections and they still matter. The fact of them not being in person creates opportunities for us to say things we wouldn't necessarily say face to face with people. On top of that, we're being forced to communicate primarily that way during this pandemic because we are not able to be face to face with each other. And then further, we create affinity groups and move deeper into our own bubbles, which sometimes is for protection and sanity, but can also create less resilient people who are completely shocked by the possibility that people could think any other way. The number of times I've heard people say, I just can't fathom why someone would vote for that person. I've heard people say that about Biden or Trump. I just can't fathom why anyone who would. And it makes me think about the last 4 years and about how little has changed in these last 4 years in terms of our desire in any way, shape, or form to understand one another. It turns out, actually, that no amount of shaming or blaming others, people who thought differently than you, seemed to convince enough people to create that mandate. People on the left or liberal or progressive or Democrat, whatever language you want to use around that side of the spectrum, the political spectrum, you weren't able to shame and blame people into stopping voting for Trump, it turns out. It wasn't a good model, it turns out. And people on the right, the conservative, the Republican, the Make America Great Again slogan, same. It turns out that you could not bluster or argue or blame and shame liberal snowflakes and whatnot into toughening up and realizing that your guy was the guy. It turns out that didn't shift anything. And while it's very likely that we're going to have a new president in January, um, it's going to be based on a few thousand votes in very, very specific locations in the country. That means that we did not spend the past 4 years learning how to connect. Now, I'm not trying to say that as a way of shaming all of us, even if it feels that way. I think it's more of, and it's a self-indictment as much as it is anything. But when people ask me where God is in this, I think part of what God is doing is showing us this reality, this truth of what works and what doesn't. I want to say something about Revelation. Oh, but I'll wait because I see Karis is on here. Karis, I'm so glad you're here. It's I'm really glad we're friends, and so honored that we got to meet in Cincinnati a few years ago, and I'm really grateful that you're here. And your question is one of vulnerability and authenticity, and I want to honor that. So thank you, and I will do my best to respond with similar vulnerability and authenticity. She says, Phil, any words of comfort for a stressed out person of color who feels like no matter the outcome, we've lost already? So first and foremost, I love you. And there's a place for you, not only in this church, but in this country. And secondly, that I grieve with you that it feels like a loss. That there isn't some semblance of, I'm using the word a lot today, but that mandate, that sense of a shared understanding of what it means to be a person of color in this country. Many people don't even think that was on the ballot. What we heard people talk about was the handling of the pandemic and the economy, which are important things, both. And both actually affect people of color in this country disproportionately to how they affect white people, both the pandemic and general economic reality of this country. So I don't mean to like clinicalize or decompartmentalize those issues, right? But for many people, they wouldn't have even said race was technically on the ballot. And I think that's dishonest, or at least kidding ourselves to think that it wasn't on the ballot. I mean, I think honestly, in terms of your hope, I think about being a Christian, that our hope is, there's this language that we use in the church. I'm gonna seem abstract for a second, but I'm still with you, so stick with me. This idea of the already and the not yet, that Jesus has already come and done the work, and then there's the not yet, which is the second coming hasn't happened, and the things that have been needed to make right in terms of the what's occurred on the cross has occurred, and the victory of love over death is real, and our promise from God is real and powerful, and also here we are in all of this, right? Wondering when it's going to get to be just and right and reconciled the way we hope, and that there's healing and recovery in a way that we believe is that we can recognize as fully divine and beautiful. We live in that space of hope for the future with what I believe is an understanding that the conclusion is foregone. Love wins. That's true. God is sovereign, and that is a reality. And the story of humanity is one of redemption, and justice will be done. Mercy will be visited upon those who need it. And you will be comforted, not necessarily by me, but by God, by Jesus himself. The Beatitudes are a place to find your comfort, recognizing that in you, in your grief today, and in your sorrow, which is real and earned and genuine, that God is present in your grief and sorrow, and that you are blessed. Right? Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are you when you are persecuted and ridiculed and all sorts of things in his name's sake, such as it was for the prophets. So you are blessed. But I want to speak also on a more earthy level about this. The numbers are clear. The shift is happening. The shift is happening in terms of the power of people of color in this country politically. It is not where you or I want it to be, but it is clearly happening. And the shift is happening for women. Again, nowhere near as quickly as we want it to be, but it is happening. And we're seeing that demographic shift, and we're seeing a generational shift that is more in tune with the enfranchisement and empowerment of people of color, of women, of LGBTQ plus persons, of all those who have historically been marginalized by the current dominant culture. We are seeing the death rattle of the dominant culture, and something new is being built. Now, a lot of people might hear that and think of this as code language for conservatism will die and liberalism is going to win. And I don't buy that, because I think conservatism and liberalism are things that are like, it's like that thing about two wolves fighting inside of you or whatever. But like, I think there's conservatism and liberalism in all of us. And I think that we are conservative about some things and liberal about others. I think our culture is going to have both present in it. That's just real. Okay. So I don't expect there to all of a sudden be a liberalism that it trumps all conservatism. Do you like how I use that word? You probably didn't. Or a conservatism that beats out liberalism. I don't buy that. But the Republican Party, as we understand it, cannot survive, even if it retains power right now. And the Democratic Party, actually, as it stands, really can't survive, but needs to change and shift in a different way. But we're going to see those shifts happen because they will have to. I think there's tremendous hope. And I don't just mean flipping states red to blue or blue to red or anything. I'm trying not to be like too pointed. I don't want to suggest that the hope for this country is that it becomes a bunch of Democrats, because I don't think that's true. I just don't buy it. I will say that the Democratic Party in this election, between the two parties that are the most dominant parties in this country, is the party that openly and actively spoke about the issues that people of color face, and did so in a way that seemed to resonate a lot more with my Christian understanding of this world. But that doesn't mean our hope is found in that party or in any party. I don't mean that to be cynical at all. See, I grew up in a church where if you weren't a good Republican, you weren't a good Christian. It was really damaging. Really damaging. To be a good Christian meant that you had to be a good Republican, a good conservative, a good American, by the definitions of the Republican conservative Americanism. That was really damaging. I do not believe that the solution to that is that being a good Democrat is being a good Christian. So I think treating political parties or political candidates like chess pieces to some degree to help us move forward in areas that I think are important makes sense. So much more. Karis, I hope that's helpful. I don't know if it is. Carolyn points out she found hope and solace in John Lewis's book Across the Bridge, A Vision for Change in the Future of America. He looks at the history and the long game and how change has happened and might continue to happen regardless of which party is in power at any given moment. This is kind of also what I mean about the center. When we talk about the center, like, I'm comfortable with the idea of being a centrist if the center includes the empowerment and enfranchisement of all people who've been on the margins. That's a concern that I have. That's a concern of Jesus. Jesus has that concern. And so I want to make sure that we don't just arbitrarily say that if the American left is here and the American right is here, then whatever's in the middle is what's best. But I do think that having a balance and a moderate attitude about culture is actually really healthy, and or can be really healthy, and can lead to change in some ways better. And a recognition that every culture in the history of the world has liberal proponents, has conservative proponents, and has moderating people. That's how cultures work. So our desire to like beat the other guy doesn't work. A couple things Lisa said that are really important to me. Lisa, you said, as a nurse, change never comes from shaming and yelling. Change comes from the relationship. I could not agree with you more. I just am so right there with you. Any change that we make happens in relationship. And so we have to figure out which relationships that we have the strength to be in. That's for sure. And again, there are times where you might have to back out of a relationship or distance yourself for the sake of feeling, of protection. But we also need to dig in sometimes. I think that's really important, and stay with each other, right? Okay. The other thing, Lisa, that you asked, and I don't remember, you said, do you still feel that if Trump wins, democracy may be traumatized beyond repair? I don't remember saying that in the first place. I don't know that democracy will be traumatized beyond repair. America might be. I want to be really clear. Like, I think Jesus wins. I don't necessarily at all think that means America survives. At all. And I love this country. I would be devastated if I live for the end of America. But I also think America will end at some point, because name an empire that hasn't. I mean, name a country that hasn't. There are some countries that have the same name as they used to have, but they've shifted completely. I mean, there are many ways that I would be devastated if I were to if I outlived the United States of America. It would be, it's traumatic and devastating. It would be the defining reality, the defining moment of our lives, right? I will say this: whether or not our president is reelected, there is no going back to a simpler time. There was never such a thing as a simpler time. What's a lie that we told ourselves? And it was a word, it was an idea, a notion that people of privilege dangled in front of ourselves, that there was a simpler time, an easier time, a better time back then, the good old days. I think America, as many of us thought of it, is dead. And I don't necessarily think that's a tragedy. And I'm really, really grateful. I'm really and genuinely grateful for our current president. He's revealed to us so much about ourselves that was already true. That was already true. And I say that without irony, or at least without intentional irony. I am grateful. We should be thankful when someone lets us know something about ourselves. We should be grateful for that. It's my pup. He's not trained yet. So I could say come, and he wouldn't at all do it. Francis, come here. See? Nothing. Like a cat. Useless. His little ear popping up. Hey, buddy. Did he come over here because I said it? Or is like a cat, did he just decide that he wanted to? We'll never know. We'll never know. I really, so okay, we got 10 minutes left. there are other thoughts that I have, but I want to make sure that I respond to any specific questions that you all might have. Please show us the dog. All right. Well, I still have him, so hold on. Come here, you. And he's still of the size that I can pick him up, even though he likes it less and less now. This is my dog, Francis. Francis. How are you? Look at, show everybody hi. Yeah, hi. How are you? He's like, he actually really likes to cuddle, but not like he's, I mean, like genuinely would like wants to cuddle with me all the time, but he's like, but not like this. This is weird. Like, don't show me off like this. All right, get down. Go on. Oh. And that got on film too. There you go, buddy. Sorry. Oh, I hurt his leg just now. I just hurt my dog's leg. Come here, pal. Hold on one second. Come here. Let's see. He tried to jump down from me, and his foot got caught on the chair. Listen, if I have to take him to the vet, we're all splitting the bill because you all wanted to see the dog, just for the record. There's no blood. He's doing okay. He's all right. Whew. Scary. Thanks a lot, guys. He is a pretty great dog, actually. I do love him. And he's standing normally now, but he's a little mad at me. Sorry, pal. We're gonna have to make up later. I'm gonna have to get him a treat. That's how that's gonna have to go. Rachel, I take responsibility. I also took a huge chunk and I can't take any more stress. He's okay. He's okay. You guys, he's a dog. He's okay. It's okay. You know what he's doing right now? He's yawning and looking around for a place to lie down and scratch himself. I mean it. Don't worry about him. It's all good. Okay? Like this mighty country, my dog is resilient. Okay? And very beautiful. He's all right. I do get a little nervous. There was one time when Paige was a baby. One time that I tried to film her. One time. I was like, I'm going to film my daughter. And that was the time that she fell off the ottoman and landed on her face. And I was just like, oh, God. And I still have it. I still have the video. I don't show it to anybody, but it's like I have it. And I'm just like, it's still like this moment of just like, the one time I tried to film you, I have no business being a dad. So when this is all over, just know that I'm going to hang up and I'm going to go and I'm going to sit with my dog and very tenderly check in on him and apologize profusely, even though he does not understand. Okay, guys, friends. Most of you are women. I shouldn't say guys. I'm learning. I'm still learning to change my language, okay? Friends, siblings, fellow citizens. We're wrapping up here. We got a few more minutes. So just to do that, just to wrap up, okay? Look, nothing has changed in terms of what our work is. Nothing has changed. We have the job to do of revealing God's love to this world in our thoughts, in our words, and in our deeds. We have the responsibility to follow Jesus into this world and to both reveal the love that is already present and to bring more love with us as we go. We have the responsibility to love people in ways that create a more just, equitable, and kind, peaceful, and free world. And we have a responsibility to live into communities that are structured and centered around that love of God that is in Jesus Christ. That is who we are. That hasn't changed even a little bit. What has been helpful for us in this election is that reminder, that ongoing revelation, not one-time unique revelation, but that ongoing revelation that we don't get to pretend we're all on the same page, or that America is equal to the kingdom of God, or that we can just vote and then our person wins. I almost said our guy, which is what it always ends up being. These, our guy wins, our person wins, and then we can rest. Rest is going to have to be built into our daily lives, everyday resting, and then weekly resting in a larger sense, so that we can be active and make an impact in this world for good, for God. The work of love is ongoing, and God wins. Evil loses. That's the end of it. We want to live in the world where we know that's true, and then we want to roll up our sleeves and participate with God in the work of helping make that true. Okay? How has that changed in the last 24 hours? It hasn't. That doesn't mean that if you have something to grieve about this, that you shouldn't grieve. I'm not trying to take away your need to grieve. Grieve. That's fine. Yes. We are allowed to feel all sorts of ways about this. I just want us to remember that the results of this election were not going to be the defining reality of our lives in this world. God defines who we are in this world. Okay? God. And God defines you as a beloved and belonging daughter, a beloved and belonging son. We are siblings one to another, and we are meant to bear one another's burdens as we march through this world in solidarity, to understand one another and care for one another. This is why we're here. If we do that here in America, great. If we do that with Trump as president, great. If we do that with Biden as president, great. The work's the work. There are people who will make it easier on us, granted. There are people who will make it harder, granted. And we would like to see justice and equity be promoted by our country itself, by the laws and legislators of this country, yes. And we will always work towards that, or should be. And when they're not, our work is still the work. And when they are, you know what I'm going to say, work's still the work. I'm really grateful that so far, from what we can see, yesterday was a really peaceful day. And a lot of people really love their country and want to participate in it. That's something. That is something. I'll take that. And I am so grateful. As I said at the very beginning, I'll end the way I began. I'm so grateful that we get to share this together. That whatever comes our way in the coming days, weeks, and months and years, that we are meant to be in it together, and that we are a community that understands that. So thank you. I love you all. I was very much dreading this morning, this thing. And then I checked in with God and realized after I had a check-in with God that we were going to be good, and that this was actually going to be exactly what we needed, and just to be together in this way. So thank you. Some of you have been with us many times. Some of you have never been with us before. We generally do this every week on Tuesday mornings at 11. We shifted it to Wednesday because of this election, but we'll be back next Tuesday, 11 a.m. to be together. And we do this. People ask questions, and I do my best to respond, and hopefully it makes some kind of sense. And when it doesn't, someone usually lets me know. Okay. What else? I think that's it. I think we should go. All right. Thank you all. Thanks, Beth. Thanks, Betsy. Thanks, Betsy. Thanks, Emily. Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, Rachel. Thanks, Karis. Thanks. Anyone else? I know there's other folks here. Kathy's probably here. Kathy, you asked me some questions last week that I answered tangentially, but not directly. So we may get into those next week. We'll have more questions and more things to think about in terms of the election. I know for sure. All right. Much love to you all. Thanks for joining me here at Casa de Vol, and we'll be back in the office, I believe, next week with better internet, which is being installed right now. So that's a good thing. And I'm going to go check on my dog and make sure that we're still friends, which is iffy. All right. Take care, everybody.